I just got another old SPI title here. Found this on eBay, called After the Holocaust, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic society rebuilding simulation, I guess you could say. As it says there in the title, The Nuclear Devastation of America, Recovery and Reunification. This is the alternative red cover. The original cover of the game was a sort of that greenish color, I guess, similar to, in terms of color, to the Middle-earth War of the Ring game. Had that kind of look to it, more yellow, I think, than green, but that was what the original release looked like. I think that was a designer's edition that had a mounted board. My understanding is that the red version of the game does not have a mounted board and just has a paper map, which, as it turns out, I generally prefer, especially in the older games that had multi-part boards instead of single-piece boards. In that case, I'd typically just prefer to have a paper map that I can throw a sheet of plexi over and play on. So, but this one was actually still in the shrink, and you never know with these games, games this old, if that's the original shrink. They usually may have been shrink-wrapped, maybe by a retailer or something after the fact, or by the person selling it on eBay. So you're always sort of taking a risk when you buy something that's still in shrink. Who knows what the contents could be like inside, especially for something this old. So, but I thought this would be kind of a cool opportunity to actually rip the shrink off of a 35-year-old game. And the shrink, I have to say, does look pretty old on there. It's kind of, it's maybe hard to see on camera, but it's kind of yellowed with age. So, this, for all I know, this could be the original shrink. You can see on the back of the box that's an errata sheet, and there you can kind of read through the paper and see it says After the Holocaust errata. So, I don't know when this was originally shrink wrapped, but we'll rip the shrink off and see what's inside. There's already a hole down here. Maybe I can get it started. So this game, I got it fairly cheaply in the shrink wrap. It is not, unlike some SPI games, it is not a pricey find. It was never a particularly popular game when it was released. Probably because the rules are a little bit rough, and there's just lots of planning and accounting and math and stuff like that in the game. So yeah, the sheet in the box was an errata sheet back when errata was printed when the game released. And isn't this great? Only half a sheet, basically just a couple of paragraphs of errata as of December 1979. And, games had just, I think, a lot more playtesting. Generally didn't have as much errata, or certainly no living rules today. And that's not to say that games were perfect back then. I think the industry supported a larger network of playtesters, and publishing companies were big enough back then to be able to do a lot of their editing and stuff in-house, instead of having independent contractors or volunteers have to do it. The hobby is just too small now to support teams of editorial staff at game publishers. War game publishers today, even the biggest ones, are basically a handful of people that just publish the games. The developers and designers do all of the work in terms of proofing rules, play testing. All that stuff is all done by volunteers and independent contractors now. The hobby just can't support businesses with staffs, large staffs of people. Not even large staffs. These war game publishing today can't even support small staffs. I mean, these aren't even small businesses we're talking about. These are micro businesses, basically, which is, I mean, even GMT, is maybe 10 people, if that. That might be even overstating it. Most publishers otherwise are just, the equivalent of a couple guys in their garage churning this stuff out. So thinking of publishers today, the way you would think of SPI or Avalon Hill, which were large companies with offices, and not large companies. They were small businesses back then, but had large or fairly large staffs of people to do artwork and proofing and editing and designing and developing and all that stuff. All was done more in-house. It doesn't exist anymore. But there's, so you see living rules today, but living rules in a game doesn't necessarily mean that it was unplayable on publication. It simply means that the community of wargaming today is so small, and the interaction between players and designers and publishers is so immediate and so close that the designers can have immediate feedback on these games and say, oh, I should clarify this section of the rules because people are having trouble with it. So that's not errata. That's, the designer maybe didn't state something in the rules as well as he could have for more people to understand it, so he can go back in and refine passages in his rules and say, hey, it's clearer, this will be clearer based on feedback that I've gotten if I write it this way. So, you can still play the game with the original rule book, but the designer takes it upon himself to say, hey, here's some things that I can shore up in these rules. So for people who want to, they can print this version of the rules out and hopefully have an easier time understanding the game. But generally the games are in no way broken without the living rules. The living rules are just sort of a nice bonus for players who come along after the fact, after the game's been released. They can use that to ease their way into the game more so maybe than the original rules provided. Anyway, the shrink is off, so let's pop this open and see what's actually inside. Money. It's a box full of money. Yes, this game actually has money in it. What you can see is all still on sheets. It's all perforated, so you can just punch all these out. 2 sheets of punch out money. Here are the rules. Oh, looks like the map and everything is inserted in there. 20 pages of rules, so not too bad. Who designed this, actually? Wow. So I guess I never really knew this. Redmond Simonson himself actually did the design of this game, and of course did all the graphics and stuff, because he did all the graphics for all of SPI's games. But I guess I didn't realize he was the designer. That's cool. But as you can see, these are, again, more typical, well-organized SPI rules, using the case numbering system that still prevails in the wargame business today. 3 columns, nice small print. I'll be curious to see how these rules read. I don't know how many games Redmond Simonson actually designed himself. I'm just more familiar with him as a graphic designer and one of the iconic graphic designers in the wargame business. He is responsible for all the SPI games and their classic, utilitarian yet still aesthetically pleasing look. Some designer's notes in there. I'm interested in reading those. And then here's the map, which I will lay out and look at shortly after we go through the rest of this. Looks like we have identical sets of charts and tables. So 4 identical sets of charts and tables, not on cardstock, those are just on paper. The paper feels about the same as what's used for the manual. Starvation table. That doesn't sound pleasant. Tax table, corruption table, depreciation table, unemployment table, investment chart, stockpiling costs. A dismal science indeed. In fact, Form 1040. Nice. Should be an interesting game. And unpunched counters. Again, classic matte finish SPI counters with their precise yet slightly incomplete die cutting that results in those big side nubs or corner nubs, or nibs, if you will, on the counters. But typical utilitarian yet effective graphic design for the counters. And hey, the old inserts in here. It's almost like an old newsletter here. New titles for July '79 through January 1980. Their advance announcements. Compare this to DG Games, which has Decision Games, which has taken over all of the old SPI titles. I like how they've designed this. They've got like new titles and advanced announcements on the front page, but then they break everything down by contemporary era, World War II, 19th century, World War I, pre-19th century. Nice organization, but Decision Games still operates. They own strategy and tactics, and still own a lot of these. Sure, fantasy and sci-fi games. Own all of these old SPI titles, but they still operate on a paper newsletter. So, Decision Games, definitely a company that's still living 30 years ago. Customer service card. Most of the old games, you'll see response cards like these in there. But I had never actually played any SPI games back when SPI was in business. I think they went out of business in '81 or so, or sold all of their assets off to TSR. And I think it was 1981 when that happened. It might have been '82 or '83. But either way, I was, by '83 I was 8 years old, so I had not played any actual SPI games until long after they went out of business. So seeing this kind of old stuff in there is kind of cool, just because I didn't experience it at the time. I played some of the old Avalon Hill games, but I think even by the time I was playing those, Avalon Hill was already in their long decline throughout the late 80s and into the early 90s. So all that's left in the box here are a couple of the light as air SPI dice and a counter tray, which is always nice to have those. So let me put all this away and I will unfold the map and take a look at that. Alright, actually pick the tripod up here. Try not to wave this around too rapidly. As you can see, it is a paper map, and it is classic SPI Simonson style. Plenty of charts on the map itself. The typical gray background, or border coloring, which all the SPI maps had, and then fairly typical font and hex design. And there's your terrain key, and then here's where you're tracking all of your resources and so forth for the rebuilding of the country. So in fact, the game the map is actually mostly charts. If you think about it here, just looking all around the border, mostly charts with the map of the country kind of squeezed into the middle. So definitely not one of the more graphically intensive maps. But you know, there's still a lot going on here. Obviously, it looks like you've got some fallout zones there in some of the major cities with the skulls and crossbones, even up into Canada there. So it'll be interesting to see how this actually plays out. I know Callendale did a playthrough of the game, fairly lukewarm on it, just because it is such a accounting heavy type game. So if you're interested in seeing how the game itself actually plays, you can check out Callendale's videos. It's one of hundreds, maybe thousands of playthrough videos that he's done, but you can check that out. Thanks for watching.